Welcome along to the Animal Behaviour lecture. It's a taster lecture that I'm giving. My name is Graeme Shannon and I'm a lecturer in zoology in the School of Natural Sciences. So I'm going to be focusing specifically on animal behaviour and exploring it using sound. But before we start, just broadly talking about why you might want to study animal behaviour, I've certainly enjoyed exploring various aspects of this for the last 25 years. I think what attracts so many people and their interest to behaviour is just the range of ways that animals interact with their environment and their own species, as well as across taxa, and just how varied these different behaviour are, depending upon the species that we're looking at. And not just that, it's not just fascinating in its own right, but it has key benefits and links through to conservation, animal welfare and human health. So a really interesting and important topic in its own right. In terms of my own research, I'm really interested in three key fields, predominantly behaviour, but very much where it intersects with conservation and ecology. So this Venn diagram to the right, kind of where they intersect, the applied use of behaviour to explore questions to do with a variety of species of wildlife, but mainly social mammals, is where I focus most of my research. And in this taster lecture, I want to discuss a bit of this research, specifically using acoustics to study the communication between elephants and their ability to use complex ecological knowledge in the environment. And that was titled Leadership in Elephants, the Adaptive Value of Age. So looking whether older leaders make better leaders. Elephants are fascinating subjects when it comes to understanding and exploring cognition or intelligence. They're long-lived, upwards of 60 years. They are large-brained. They're also large animals, but they have a large brain relative to body size. Much like we do, they have this encephalization quotient that physiologists use for measuring the relative size of the brain. And if it's as you would predict for the size of the animal, it would come out at a 1. Anything greater than 1 indicates greater intelligence than expected, and vice versa, lesser than 1. Elephants come out around 2.5, which is pretty much comparative to a chimpanzee, so quite impressive, and I could show that on this graph here. So here we have these encephalization quotients. You can see dolphins and humans are very high, great apes also, and elephants come out about here. So you've got very large brain sizes. They're incredibly social. They exist in these complex social networks of multiple families interacting together over the course of long periods of time, but also over huge areas as well. So knowing who you know and knowing you don't is really important. It's important for social interaction. And they're always active. They're very gregarious. They're herbivores. So they're having to move and feed all the time. And that makes them very interesting from a kind of social perspective because they're coming into contact with lots of individuals over the course of the year. So they're engaging and acquiring information as they move on their environment and also on conspecifics, other elephants. But there is one other element of elephant society which is really key, and that is the matriarch, the oldest female in the group who generally leads decision-making and where they're foraging, how they're responding to threats, and where they're going to move to in a given day. This is one of my favourite matriarchs. Took this photo from the top of the Land Rover, so got a rather unusual perspective of while she was sleeping, just in front of the bull bar of my Land Rover, to kind of face on because I was sitting on top of the car that day. So now we go ahead with assessing the cognitive abilities in the wild. How do we do this? How do we explore how good they are at making decisions using complex information? This is quite challenging. In a domestic situation or maybe in a lab, you might be able to train animals to perform certain tasks. This obviously is going to be very challenging and almost impossible to do with wild animals such as elephants in large national parks where they're ranging over great distances and they're far from tame. But one way we can get to this is through vocal communication, because this provides a key source of social and ecological information that they're dealing with on a regular basis, listening and responding to the information that's coming from other elephants, but also from other species. So we can use playback experiments where we record these sounds and play them back to the animals to see how they respond under a range of scenarios. and this can be a very powerful tool for exploring behaviour. So I was very fortunate to work in Amboseli National Park in Kenya on the border of Tanzania. So that's Mount Kilimanjaro in the background there, and the national park covers about 330 square kilometres of savanna, grassland, marshland and woodland below the mountain. I was also very fortunate that the elephants have been studied in Amboseli since 1971, so 50 years this year, which is quite incredible, and they've tracked thousands, literally thousands of elephants from even birth to death, recording all individuals in the family group, when they were born, who they're related to, and each individual can be recognised, body size, tusk length, shape of the ears, and numbers of animals in their group. And they're pretty relaxed when it comes to driving and observing them in Land Rovers within the park because they've been used to this for the past 50 years. So we wanted to explore ecological knowledge, their ability to handle detailed information on resources and threats within the environment. One of my favourite examples of this is the grey-cheeked mangabey that actually visits fruiting trees more frequently when the weather has been warm and sunny than it will do if the weather has been cool and rainy. This obviously links in with them knowing that warm, sunny weather will create likelihood that trees will have fruited to a greater extent. So they're using this information to actually plan when they go searching for fruits at specific trees. As in humans, we do have some anecdotal evidence that the benefit of older leaders, there is a benefit of older leaders among a number of species, such as the giant river otter, elephants, as we're going to discuss, and orca, or killer whales. And I'll come back to them at the end. So our experimental design involved recording lions roaring in the Serengeti. We simulated different numbers of lions, either one lion roaring alone or three in chorus, and then we matched pairs of these for both male and female lions. So we had one male, one female, three males, three females, and then we had multiple exemplars of that. The playback procedure involved getting a very large speaker that was designed by a bespoke speaker company in the UK who quite enjoyed the challenge of creating a speaker that could produce very high frequencies of the lion roars, which got to quite high frequencies, whereas opposed to they also needed to produce a speaker that gave very low frequencies associated with the elephant calls, the elephant contact calls, the rumbles. So this was loaded into the back and driven by one very large battery, which would power the playback speaker and produce very authentic lion roars. We then headed out into the field to find the elephants, and we would locate a group, observe them for about 10 minutes to check their behaviour was relaxed, they were foraging and moving, nothing was agitating them, the matriarch was there, and all key female individuals were in the group. We then position ourselves 100 metres from the elephant and play the particular lion roar, whether it be 1 versus 3, female versus male, for that particular experiment, and then record the resulting behaviour of the elephants. We were looking for 4 key behavioural responses. One was a prolonged listening, that's when they would listen, stop any behaviour like foraging or moving, and listen very intently, looking towards the source of the sound. Defensive bunching, when they moved in together, often protecting the youngest in the middle of the group. Bunching intensity was the speed at which that bunch took place. It could be quite slow, it could be quite fast. And then mobbing approach, which is really interesting behaviour, which they kind of form a phalanx of elephants and approach the threat, because there's not many predators that would take on multiple large female elephants trying to chase them away. In fact, the predator's only real chance is surprise and kind of ambushing maybe a smaller elephant. So these large females getting together, mobbing, would be quite successful. Give an example here of one of our videos that we got of where we were playing 3 male lions. To a large matriarch and her family. She's at the middle one on the screen. You can see they immediately stop. I'm going to turn off the sound of the lions because it distorted rather on because we were so close to the camera. And they start to see her move. She's the largest one, female, second from the right. And they move into a very coordinated bunch. see she moves to the rear, all the calves go to the centre of the group where they're most protected, and then the big females move forward. So they're looking for the lions, and you can see that extended ears, looking out, it's prolonged listening, but pretty relaxed. It's a coordinated group. They're not panicking, they're not running around. And that was a really nice coordinated response of bunching and prolonged listening that we tended to see with the older matriarchs. Got another video now. Unfortunately, it's shot into the sun because it was just towards the end of the day when we got this one. But there was a family group moving out of the swamp in the evening, and we played them a single female lion, I believe it was, and I've had to take off the soundtrack to this one, not because the lion distorted it, because there was a research assistant with me who started swearing rather a lot, and you might notice why. So we can see that the elephants start to pick up pace. We've played the lion roar, and now they're starting to run at us, and I'm really questioning the wisdom of playing lion roars to elephants. This is about 30 tons of elephant running straight at us. And you can see that female at the front, raised head. This is why I was talking about the mobbing approach, where they all come in a really coordinated phalanx of elephants, kind of looking for the threat and trying to nullify it. And I'm pretty sure they would attack any lion that happened to be in the area if they'd seen one. They paid us no attention at all. They did not link the lion noise with us. And that's the matriarch just coming up to the end. So a pretty exciting kind of mobbing approach, which I was discussing earlier. So we did 72 of these playbacks over 2.5 field seasons. Took a long time to get repeat playbacks to different groups. As I say, it was over the full area of the national park. Relocating elephants could be quite tricky. But 72 playbacks were completed. And we thought that we'd find that the oldest females, the oldest matriarchs, would be the best at discriminating 3 lines from 1 line. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, it was quite interesting that they all seemed to be able to do that, in fact. Young matriarchs, old matriarchs were very good at discriminating 3 lines from 1 line. So that skill was not age-based, they were all able to do it. And as so often with elephants, they were doing something more subtle and quite remarkable in many ways. And that was the oldest females, our 61 plus bracket, so that's the group right to the far right of the graph, were actually discriminating and reacting more to male lions than they were female lions. And what we think was going on here was these older matriarchs were detecting that male lions present greater threat and were actually discriminating the lion roars, which are very similar, from male and female lions, and responding accordingly. You can see their bunching intensity was a lot higher. But what value is there in being able to discriminate between male lion roars from female? Well, interestingly, lion attacks are comparatively rare. They don't happen very often, but when they do happen, it is generally male lions that are behind it. Male lions are much more opportunistic. They're often about 50% larger than females. They take down larger bodied prey than females. They're very effective hunters in their own right, despite some documentaries kind of suggesting otherwise. And they will go for these opportunistic preying upon calves. And every example we could find in the literature or anecdotally, when a calf or a young elephant had been killed by lions, it was almost always a male lion behind it. But because they're comparatively rare, the lion attacks, and there are only very subtle difference in the acoustic characteristics of lion roars, it's very difficult for the elephants to learn this information. I cannot tell the difference between a male lion roar and a female lion roar, even having listened to those tracks multiple times over many years. Also, the sex ratio of lions is female biased, so elephants are likely to be coming in contact with females much more than they are males. So this experience, being able to tell these more deadly males from the females, takes time to acquire. You have to gain it over time, and as we could see, it was the oldest females, our 60 pluses, these matriarchs were making the best decisions when it came to the threat associated with male lions versus females. So there's a real adaptive value of age here, that the oldest elephants continue to have an important role on the survival and reproductive success of individuals within their groups, so their daughters and their granddaughters, through their greater knowledge. This has actually been called the grandmother hypothesis, and it was when individuals will live well beyond their reproductive years because they still have a great benefit to the group. Here's one of my favourite elephants. It's an old individual. So incredibly long tusks, particularly for a female. You can see the sunken temporal lobes on the head, suggesting that she really is quite old, but she was one of the most effective leaders when it came to guiding her group relative to threats that they kind of encountered or finding resources. She was a very, very canny old female, that one. And interestingly, just a few years after we published this work, there was also research that was published looking at killer whales and their ability to find forage in low resource years or find fish in low resource years. And what they found, that was in normal years when there was an abundance of salmon, that the leaders were males, young females, old females. It was quite mixed, as in the top graph. But in years of very low salmon abundance, almost always the groups were led by these post-reproductive females. These are the oldest females. They're no longer reproductive anymore. They've gone through the menopause, which is quite rare in the animal world, but orca will live for many years post-menopausal. And it seems, again, this grandmother hypothesis coming into play, that they're actually having a direct benefit to their offspring and their offspring's offspring through their great ecological knowledge and their greater ecological knowledge than the other individuals that's been acquired over a lifetime, and that they could still find rare and scattered resources such as the fish, whereas the other individuals might not have done, and if not, they may well have starved. And just in case you doubt that elephants' matriarch has a great role to play in decision making, I thought I'd finish with this video. So we were testing their response to the red cloth, which is lying to the right. So the red colour is very synonymous with the local Maasai, and occasionally Maasai and elephants come into conflict, and you can see these young elephants are very nervous. No one wants to go very close to the red cloth. They're quite interested, but a bit frightened. And now the matriarch's joined at the back of the group, and she's come to see what it's all about. You can see her walking forward now, and they're sniffing, looking. She looks at it once more, decides it doesn't present a threat, and leads the group. You can see she's the first to lead them. And they all walk on this side of her, almost stuck to her, because no one's quite brave enough to walk next to the red blanket. But you can see how her decision-making led the rest of the group, and how calm she was in leading them forward. It's quite remarkable behaviour there. So hopefully this short taster lecture has given you an idea of how acoustics can help us explore animal behaviour. And this is work that I'm continuing today with postgraduate students, also with undergraduate project students in their third year, to look at a range of different topics in animal behaviour. And these conclude continuing our exploration of cognition and decision making in the complex social and ecological world of African elephants. Also exploring biological mechanisms that drive response to human disturbance. So I explore the effects of noise on different species of wildlife. Using acoustics as a tool for conserving wildlife. Acoustics are very powerful for monitoring and detecting the presence of animals. And finally, using acoustic for understanding movement behaviour of elusive vocal species, where we can pick up their vocal calls, their communication, and use it as a indirect measure of where they're moving to and from. So these are just some of the ideas of the acoustic research we have ongoing here at Bangor, and that you can be involved with as an undergraduate student. Thank you very much for listening to the Taste Lecture. I wish you all the best and hope you enjoy your day of exploring what Bangor has to offer.